There from Tana River. We have a beautiful country and a lot needs to be celebrated and also discovered even as we promote tourism in this country. Well, let's shift gears to our conversation of the day, and it is facing childhood trauma as well. To help us understand this more and also hear from their own life stories, I'll start off with Dr. Catherine Gachanja, who is a counseling psychologist. We are also joined in the other studio by Chenga Ogola, who is a certified professional life coach. Also joined by Jefferson Otieno, who is a mental health artist, and joining us virtually is Januss, who is a development communications expert. Thank you all for being part of this conversation. And we'll start off with you, Catherine. Let's first define what childhood trauma is.
Right. Thank you so much, Gladys, even for the invite to come and weigh in this conversation. And when we talk about childhood trauma, it is about the adverse childhood experiences, the extreme childhood experiences, those experiences that go beyond the capacity of the child to be able to handle, because they lack the information and lack the skills and lack the know-how of handling the experience that they are going through.
Yes. And
Yes.
what would be some of them?
Some of the adverse childhood experiences, when it comes to research, we call it ACE. The adverse childhood experiences, some of them are like when a child has lost a parent, when a child is still very young, or even if thieves come into the house and the children can see how the parents are overwhelmed. And because their world is anchored in their parents, then that insecurity and that, you know, being overwhelmed, that the parents are not able to handle that experience makes a child very overwhelmed. But again, a child can be sexually molested. And many a times children are molested by close, significant family members. That is where they were anchoring their hope, but now their hope is shattered. And at the same time, if children go through a home that is disorganized, and a home can be disorganized because there is violence in the home, or there is neglect in that home, or there is poverty in that home, that makes the parents not be able to respond to the needs of the child adequately or in a functional way where a child will feel my needs are taken care of, whether they are the needs of survival or they are the needs of continuity. All those situations take away power from the child because the child is fearful, the child is frightened, the child does not see a future.
All right. So now how does that impact on adulthood? Because this is what we're trying to connect today.
Right. When a child goes through that, they do not have an ability to be able to speak out. And many a times, like in sexual violation, they are told not to say by the perpetrator of the sexual abuse. Now, because of the limitations that a child has, and we are talking about the mental limitation or the cognitive limitation, they are not able to process their emotions in a way that helps them to be able to empty out what they have gone through. Because if that is fear, if that is anger, if that is pain, it has no way of coming out. Now, as an adult, say, especially we pick it in adolescence, the child is now in puberty stage and now their mind is expanding, and what happened to them in childhood now start servicing on the outside, because now they have gotten to a level they can be able to process what happened to them in childhood. But because it is hidden within them somatically. You know, like Gladys, there are times you can feel like something is passing across your stomach. And you say, what is that now? because you're connecting with something that happened in the past. And the only way that you are accessing it is somatically through your body. And so as an adolescent or even as an adult, what happens is that now you're going through PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. It is not happening now, but you're going through the stresses of the experiences that have remained unprocessed throughout your life to the stage of adolescence or to the stage of an adult. And this time, one is depressed, one is psychotic, because you're not able to handle the overwhelming feeling of pain that has now descended on you, because you have opened the unconscious, and now you can experience what happened to you in the childhood. And because it is accumulated, not Gladys, that when you go through one trauma, you have a way of looking for other traumas that are of the same kind. Let me explain. If a child is sexually molested by a dad or an uncle or another family member, there is a way, because now the child's power has been taken away from her or from him, that the child is going to be molested by a teacher. A child is going to again be molested by a neighbor. A child is going to be molested again by a stranger. So there is accumulation of other traumas that follow the initial trauma. So at this time, they are so overwhelmed, they do not know how to handle it.
Okay, and we'll talk more about the connects that Catherine is talking about in a moment. Let's hear from those that have walked in these shoes in different forms. Remember that childhood trauma looks different for different people. Let me start off with Ching. When you hear Catherine talk about the different traumas, do you identify with any?
Actually, I identify with a lot. I identify with a lot that she has talked about. So, you know, she talked about, you know, a child being in a space that's unstable, that's not safe. I grew up in that kind of setting where there was domestic violence, and my father was violent. And that really caused us to be in a space where, you know, to the opposite of where you're meant to be receiving love and warmth. Really every day was a space of having to manage your fear. Yeah, and you know, as a result, also, I think Dr. You might have mentioned, you know, separation from my parent because of that same domestic violence. Then my parents did have to separate, and from a young age, then I had to live separately from my mother. So yes, I can resonate a lot with what she has shared, and I can definitely see how, you know, I have come, you know, a long journey. From teenagehood until now, having to deal with the effects of what that domestic violence and space of unsafety and lack of stability, you know, did to, you know, the quality of life that I had growing up. Yeah.
And you'll tell us more about that in a moment. Let me hear from Jefferson. What's your story? What do you resonate with?
Thank you, Gladys. For me, childhood trauma started back then when I was like, let me say 8 years. I was very young, so growing up with a violent father who is always like beating me up most of the time, I couldn't take it, because it was hard for me to process all these thoughts that are going through my mind. Like you're being beaten, but you don't understand why. You know, how our parents were raised, they were raised like beating up a child makes them stronger, but nowadays it's like beating up a child is like violating their rights, you see. So growing up as a child, I really faced a lot of trouble. I couldn't trust my father. I was not even secure in the house, so yeah, there was a lot of trust issues.
All right. And
Yeah.
was this only on you? Was he hard on you or the rest of the children?
I think it was hard on me because I was being called weak and worthless, so it really impacted it was a big impact on me.
All right. Are you the only boy child in this family?
No, we were several, but the violence was too much. You know, like me and my cousins, like when we were together, in the evening when my father would come home, we would run. So you see, when your dad or your mom comes to you, when they come back home, you expect them, they are bringing you gifts, but with us we were running away because we know that either we are in trouble or, yeah, so that's how it was.
Okay, all right. Now, before we move on to Januss, Catherine, I think we can pick up on two things from both Acheng and Jefferson, that they faced domestic violence within their home, had a father who was very hard on them, and of course, the instability within the home. And all of them are saying, especially Jefferson, underscores trust issues. Talk about how those now become part and parcel of a child's life.
Now, from the time a child is born, then a child is developing to be able to connect with self, to connect with others, and to connect with the world. This we call the psychosocial development. But if a child is taken through an experience where a child is not able to connect ably in a functional way to the parents or to the social world of the significant people, the child will not be able to connect with himself or herself. And we can be able to hear it in Acheng, we can be able to hear it in Jefferson, because what happens to the child is that the child is developing mistrust. I cannot trust the world. The world is dangerous. The world is insecure for me. The world is dangerous and insecure because the parents are the first people who represent how the world works. And if the world works in a way that is hurtful, a way that is painful, a way that doesn't take care of the needs of the child is not going to believe that later on, even as they continue growing up, that the world has an ability to take care of them. So the child is looking at the world and is somehow withdrawing from the world, because these kind of children like Jefferson or even Atieno, what happens is that you find you are withdrawing, not because you want to withdraw, but because you are protecting yourself. It's a way of self-protection, that I know you can't take care of me. If mom and dad did not take care of me, if mom did not suckle me, if mom or dad was beating me, then I can't believe that the world is going to be friendly to me. I can't believe that the world is loving. So what happens is that the world of a child is shattered. And these children find it very difficult to trust even a lover. Hey, how can I trust you? Because already their trust is shattered.
Yes.
So they will have relationships because they are normal and they would want to relate, but they can't trust. We say they have fear of intimacy.
Okay, and we'll hear more from Acheng and of course Jefferson in as far as how that has translated into their adult life. Let's hear from Januss. When we talk about childhood trauma, what's your story?
Thanks, Gladys. So I guess I'm listening to all these examples and I can sit here and say I am thankful that I did not necessarily get that level of adverse childhood trauma, but mine manifested itself in my life in the sense that I got pregnant as a teenager, and having to deal with the dynamics of getting pregnant in your teens and having external entities form opinions, decide that your life is done, that you'll amount to no good because, I mean, you're pregnant, you brought shame on your family. That is where my trauma manifested itself. And it's not something that I realized until much later in my adulthood, that I'm still suffering the consequences and the adverse effects of, you know, all this kind of negativity around me. And what I perceived as shame that I'd brought onto my family. I grew up in a family that was, both parents were present, they were very supportive. Of course, there are the usual dynamics that happen within families where, you know, you have financial difficulties and things like that. So I grew up in an environment where I wouldn't say I lacked the basics, but I felt that I wasn't getting everything that I wanted to have when I looked at what everybody else around me had, the school I went to, what everybody else was accessing. I grew up as an awkward teenager who was very insecure. I did not feel like I was understood. So as I grew towards my later teen years, I started making certain decisions that were pretty much irresponsible, a sense of rebellion, but it really came from a place of feeling inadequate through a lot of external facing factors that were not necessarily household driven, but really led me down the road of finding myself pregnant, having a child when I'm still a child, pretty much, and then now walking the journey of being a parent to a young baby girl in that kind of environment, and what then that resulted into how I showed up in my relationships with my friends, but also in other forms of relationships, especially with men.
Okay, when you, now in retrospect, when you think about your childhood, what are the things within your setup that perhaps made you doubt your worth as a girl or your worth as a child that fed now to the awkwardness you talk about that you felt when you were a teenager?
I think a lot of it had to do with the environment in which I grew in. There were quite a number of people who were what we'd call super privileged, and I felt like I also deserved to be part of that. I went to a school where, many times when things were hard, my mom would pack me lunch, and by the time, it's not an insulated flask, so it's not a thermos flask, but by the time it got to lunchtime, my lunch had either gone bad, everyone else has this amazing food, delicious food, and I'm always that person who's like, I want that, I want that, I want that. I just felt that I was missing out on things that other children had, and that sort of formed a sense of, I'm not where I should be, I deserve to, I deserve better things. But then looking at the circumstances in which we're growing up, we did not lack food, right? But when I compared myself to others, I felt that things could have been a lot more different for me. So, and that's now what I went into. So growing into my teen years, feeling that because I want to be accepted, I want people to see me as someone who's worthy or somebody who can contribute something meaningful, I ended up becoming what you would pretty much call a people pleaser. And that had some significant consequences.
Question, Januss, do you think if perhaps your parents or those that you grew up with gave you more assurance about your circumstances at home, perhaps you'd have translated the world a little bit different?
Well, yes and no. I feel that my parents really did their best to provide what they could under the circumstances. But then we have to be conscious, and now for me now raising a daughter who's also in her teen years, realizing that the kind of assurance that our children need from us many a times might not be what we think as parents is what they need. Sometimes all they need to hear is that you are loved, you are wanted. I don't think in the time we grew up, we had a lot of that from our parents. So it's a lot of validation in the household. There's a lot of pressure, especially if you're a firstborn child. You need to excel, you need to do well in school, you need to be a good example for your siblings. And that in itself already is pressure on a young person who's struggling to figure out what they want, how they fit in with everything else around them. So I think assurances, I believe my parents felt that they gave me exactly what I needed. But if you do not have an environment where you can sit down and have candid conversations with your children, how do you feel about this? what would you rather see have happened differently? Until we get to a space where we can have those kind of conversations, then we'll assume that we are providing our children with that validation that they need, but yet we are doing only what we think is best, but does not really fit in with the psyche of that child.
Interesting point is there. And Catherine, I think it is important to underscore validation, affirmation for a child and the impact clearly it has on them while growing up.
Yeah, it's very interesting what Januss has brought into this discussion, that validation is very important for the child. Validation says you are okay. Even if the circumstances around you are not favoring you, you are okay. You do not become not okay because you are facing different circumstances from those of your friends. And when a child knows they are loved, or he or she is loved, and she or he is important, and they can be able to accomplish, then the child knows, I can be able to transform my world, I can be able to change my world, and I do not have to face the world having a low self-esteem or being inadequate, but I can transform my world because I have what it takes for me to be able to do that. At the age of 6, children learn to be competent, or one of the things, the virtues that they need to develop in their lives is competence. And competence is facilitated by a child initiating, like they are sweeping the house, or a child is making the table, and a parent says, you know what, you will make it in life like no other. So the child leaves the world from the inside, not from the outside. Because when the child feels inadequate, it's because they are comparing with what is on the outside. But if the child can always be located in the inside, in the way the child is facing the world, the child does not get overwhelmed. However, just like the discussion is going, sometimes parents are not trained in order to know how to respond to the needs of a child. I have written a book on effective parenting in the 21st century. And as I was interviewing the young people whom I was taking through, because I was taking them through clinical processes and taking the parents through clinical processes for me to be able to come up with the book. What I appreciated a lot is that we are blaming parents, but we have not built capacity in them to be able to respond to the needs of the children. They are doing the best thing they know how, but the best thing they know how is not fitting in the needs of the child.
Because we are all modeling how we were brought up.
Oh, yes. It is the resources. Those are the resources that the parents brings into his or her parenting.
All right. Now, we're about to take a short break here on Your World, but before we do, let me remind you of that question of the day, and would like to hear your own experience. Did you face childhood traumatic events growing up? We're talking about domestic violence, neglect, abuse, loss of a parent, and there's a couple of other experiences that you can also share with us. How have you dealt with it, or how has it also impacted you in your adulthood? Jael Ajula says, I am reparenting myself. I'm giving myself what I did not get as a child. Self-care, avoiding toxic environments and toxic people. Wow, that's powerful. David, yes, I did experience all this. I still have PTSD and uncontrollable nightmares. Wow, David, thank you for sharing, and I hope you're getting help for it. John Wanjohi says, it's not only in homes, even at school, the neglect children from poor background go through leaves many with traumas that they carry to their adulthood. Yes, Catherine actually mentioned that is another traumatic event in a child, or could be. Nick Kipto says, Yes, those days when I was to join Form 1 after primary education, I went through a difficult time alone. I felt like the world has come to an end. I felt sick. Sometimes I could find myself talking alone using signs. Ulcers terrorized me. I never disclosed about it to anyone. I have never healed up to date. Wow, Nick. Polisana, thank you for sharing, and I hope you can find a place you can speak and debrief this part of your life. Hannah Wanjiru says, what I went through in the hands of my auntie is more than hell, but I choose to forgive. I'm living a happy life now, thanks to God. Well, Hannah, we thank God for you and with you. And hey, remember, you can talk to us. That hashtag is new normal, or even give us a call using the numbers that you will see at the bottom of your screen. For now, let's take a short break. We'll be back with more.
Did you know at Ruiru Mabati Factory, we offer free delivery within the same day? Did you know at Ruiru Mabati Factory, you can open an account and lipa pole pole at your convenience? Did you know at Ruiru Mabati Factory, you can get customized sizes according to your roof plan to avoid wastage? Call us now on 0111 050 700. Ruiru Mabati Factory, mali safi kwa bei poa.
Je, wajua? Dawa ya Bedlam ina uwezo wa kuua viwango vyote kutoka mayai hadi kunguni aliyekomaa. Je, wajua? Hakuna madhara ya kukaa chumbani baada ya kupuliza.
Bedlam imethibitishwa na shirika la afya duniani WHO kwa matumizi ya nyumbani. Kwa maelezo zaidi, wasiliana nasi kupitia nambari au tovuti yetu iliyo kwenye runinga yako. Tumia Bedlam 200 SL, uangamize kunguni kabisa.
I'm growing up, I'm growing into every moment. So if
Nurture the moment. Minute Maid Nutri Defenses, fortified with vitamin E and zinc to help improve your defense system.
AMRC's objectives are aligned with the government's affordable housing pillar of the Big Four agenda. Visit any of the participating financial institutions today and start your home ownership journey. Kenya Mortgage Refinance Company, unlocking liquidity for affordable housing.
Thank you for staying with Your World. We are focusing on facing childhood traumas, and if you've heard so far is that there's a lot that could have happened when you were younger that has a direct impact on who you are today. And we're talking about unresolved traumas, and these are the ones that normally connect back to how you perhaps view the world, experience the world, or even the decisions you make as an adult. And to help us along with this conversation, still with us, Dr. Catherine Gachanja, counseling psychologist, also a Chengo Gola certified professional life coach, Jefferson Otieno, mental health artist, and of course, Januss, who is a development communications expert. Now, Aching, you said you resonated with what Catherine was saying, and now you see how it has actually connected back to who you are today. Talk about some of the experiences that perhaps awoke you to the fact that something was not right.
Yeah, that's a really good question, Gladys. Okay. I think one of the experiences that really brought light to the trauma that I had experienced, and of course at that point I could not call it trauma. I didn't even know that I'd gone through a traumatic experience. But I think it had to be when I got my first job, and I realized that I'm actually different from everyone else. I was very withdrawn, extremely shy, but then also just had a lot of fear. Fear about work, constantly fearful about work, and I think connecting it to what Dr. was saying, with the lack of affirmation and validation, then for me what was communicated is that love equals work. And for you to be affirmed, for you to be valid, to be in a certain space, then you had to prove yourself. And so it wasn't just enough to be Sarah, to be Aching. I had to work hard, I had to deliver at a certain level. And of course that then never became enough, yeah? And so, the issue of overworking has always been something that I have to catch myself about. So that's one of the things that, just brought that awareness that, okay, perhaps there's something here that you need to address. I think, talking about anxiety, being in a space that's not safe, that's not stable, where violence can erupt at any point, then my normal state of emotions was fear. And so if you've lived with that for 18 years, then, you have to sort of learn how to come out of that. So, yeah, that constant state of fear is also something that was of red alarm to me, and something that I've had to sort of process and go on a journey of undoing. I think even more recently, I've become more conscious of the ability to dream, the ability to see possibilities, to see myself go beyond what I saw growing up. Yeah, because then I was constantly in that space of turmoil. And so my dream was for safety. My dream was for stability. And so then I wasn't thinking beyond safety and stability. I think I would say that possibly I started sort of dreaming after I turned 18, where, at that time is when I moved out of that space of, sort of lack of safety. And I think that has been a big one for me most recently, just being aware that, there needs to be stretching here about your capacity to dream, believe for more, go for more. Because then the normal setup was to believe and trust for safety, which was really a basic need, and I was not aware of.
Okay, now Jefferson mentioned that mistrust became a part of his life when he was very young. Now that you have similar, backgrounds, is it something that you also noted?
Mistrust of people?
Yes.
I don't know that I would term it as mistrust. Dr. You may help me here. I think it's just a guard. I had a guard around me. And so I think even in positions of leadership, getting into work, sort of going up the ladder, I found myself in positions where I was not approachable, I was not accessible. Everyone thought that, most people that I worked with, if they didn't really know me personally, they thought I was out to get them because I was so hard. I took the stance of command and control. Yeah, and so maybe just that lack of vulnerability, allowing people to be able to see me, allowing people to be able to access me, because then perhaps I had observed that in my father to be weakness. And I believe I took that on as well as weakness for myself. And that's how leadership was demonstrated to me, and that's how then I demonstrated leadership to other people. And so it's been a journey of really just embracing, building, and cultivating trusting relationships, and allowing myself to be accessible, because then that's the only way that other people can trust me. Yeah.
Okay, and Catherine, interestingly, you walk around life with this wall around you to protect self, as you were saying, self-protection. But then again, you become almost similar to the person or the experiences that were actually that you experienced growing up. For example, Acheng says the father was, you know, hard on them, and work was what was actually something that was given an applaud or was affirmed. Talk about how you can translate something that you say, I'll never be like this, but end up living as such.
Yeah. Yes, Gladys, and you can see it because this is the only experience that the child knows. And the child is conditioned in the way that the experiences came to the child. And just like you're saying, the child is shielding himself, all herself. And the dad was a bitter person, an angry person, a rushing parent. And you become the same kind of a person. Because you have learned to be angry, you have learned to replace and to push at the back of your mind. And because you have so much that is not processed, then that is what you're going to be throwing to the people. That you're going to be an angry person to other people, and you might repeat your mother's and your father's kind of behaviors in relationship to other people. You may even parent your children in the same way. Because you see, Gladys, you have not brought your experience on the table so that you can be able to look at it and say, you know, I hated my experience because my father was a toxic father. My mother was a toxic mother. She was projecting, or she was displacing, or she was not able to contain within herself to us as the children. And that was not okay. And therefore, I wouldn't want to do the same thing to my own children. So when experience is processed, when experience is looked at, then an individual can be able to form themselves differently. Even if the experience was negative, they can say, this is what I went through, and I became an angry individual. I became a frustrated individual, and I became an individual who was wounded in the inside. But I do not want to be that individual. I would want to be a happy individual. I would want to be a contented individual. I would want to be an embracing individual. I would want to be a less hurtful individual, because I will cognitively walk through my mind as I am relating with others, and especially those that are very significant to me. Because what happens is that PTSD, you hurt people in your household because you got hurt in your household. You may not be hurting people out there in the community because they are not significant to you. But you're definitely going to hurt your friends. You will hurt those you're working with in the same environment. And more so, you're going to hurt a spouse, and you're going to hurt your children.
Okay, there's something that Acheng brings up, that she did not have, she doesn't think it's mistrust, but perhaps you can help us along with this, but she had a guard, you know, like up until recently, that's when she's been able to allow herself to even be vulnerable. How can that come across to a child coming from the parent?
Notice how Acheng is a beautiful woman. You know, and she was not able to put herself out there and say, you know what, I have resources that I can give you people, or I can dispense out there for people to benefit with. Now, when she is putting a guard, like we said, when a child is growing up, one of the virtues or one of the competencies that she needs to develop is to be able to trust the world. And a child learns to trust the world from the time the child is suckling the mother, because that is the time that the child realizes, I want to suckle, mom is there. I want to be held, and mom is there. Can you remember the kangaroo mothers who used to put babies in like a pocket,
yes,
so that the child can experience the first basic socialization? When you do not experience the first basic socialization, that you can be held by the world and you are okay, you're not going to be injured, you're not going to put the wall that Achieng started putting. Because the wall that she started putting is, if you can't take care of me, then I will take care of myself. We psychologists call it having defenses. And you can have all kinds of defenses. When we talk about personality disorders, like there has been this personality disorder that people have been saying, are you a narcissist? I don't want to get married to you. But we also need to ask ourselves, what is in the making of a narcissist? Because this is a person who lacked validation, a person who lacked feeling confident with themselves. And therefore, they are sucking everyone because they didn't get enough growing up. And they were looking for, can you be there for me so that I can be confident and so that I can have differentiation. Differentiation is where we put a marker that I am me as an entity and you are you, Gladys, as an entity. But because growing up, they were not given enough validation and their needs, their emotional needs were not met. So they keep on feeding on other people because they are retro children who are still trying to complete themselves by feeding on other people.
Wow.
And therefore, we need to help them to now define themselves so that they can see other people should not be sucked. They should not be parasites on other people, but they should actually complete themselves so that they can be mature entities relating with other mature entities, and we can do life together as mature entities. You know, when you marry a person who was traumatized growing up, then what you have done is marry an infant in some areas. Chronologically, they are 40 or 30 or 25. You're marrying a 25-year-old or a 30-year-old or a 40-year-old, but emotionally, you have married a 3-year-old. You're going to be having experiences of 3-year-olds together, and you're going to hurt each other, and you're going to pain each other and destroy each other eventually.
Wow. That is a clear connect of childhood trauma and the impact on adulthood. Jefferson, you talked about mistrust with your dad. And when you were as an adult, when did it click that something was not right?
Actually, everything was not right when I was, let's say, a teenage. Yeah, that's when I felt like everything went wrong because most of the time from childhood, now I'm coming from childhood where I missed play group. I didn't play because my dad told me like, you are too big to play with these children. So what I will do is go back home, get in my bed, go to sleep. I've not played. So then even sometimes when I want to play, I have to escape. Because you know there is trouble. Trouble is coming for you. You're going to play, you're going to get dirty. So you have to escape in order to go play. But when I went to play, I found myself alone, playing alone, and that was very depressing. So I just decided that if I can't play with these people, or if I can't find people to play with, then let me just sit at home. So that's where I started with drawing. Then getting into growing up now. Now I started facing loneliness when I was class 6. That was my worst moment, because like people are going to play for, let's say, the breaks. There are the 30 minutes breaks, so people are going to play, but I remain in class sitting on the staircase waiting for the next lesson, because I know the next lesson there are beatings, so I'm used to being beaten. So that's what is on my mind. I go back, let me go sit back, be beaten. So that's how I live my life. Then going to high school, now that was even the hardest, because now I was realizing that all these beatings are coming to a stop for a second, but the trauma is now manifesting, because I was having nightmares of me being beaten. In fact, I dreamt of my father beating me, then I wake up crying. You know, it's really hard to process, because you look at your childhood, what happened, then you look at where you are and what is happening then. So,
were you in boarding school?
Yeah, I was in boarding school.
So all these nightmares are happening in boarding school?
Yeah, they are happening in boarding school, and they still happen now.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah. When you got to campus, you said that was now the breaking point. What happened?
Let me finish with high school first.
Okay.
Yeah, so in high school, let's say there were innings, the funkies.
Yes.
Yeah, I used to sleep from 9 to 5, because the dorms were open from 9 then till 6. That's when people were coming out from the field to go eat. But me, I used to sleep from 9 when the dorms were being opened. And imagine me covering myself in a blanket on a hot day, because I don't want to socialize with people. So you see, that's what happened when I couldn't socialize when I was young. I couldn't socialize at home, at church. I faced social anxiety, because, you know, when you're going to church, there are always those, let's remain and talk after church when the service is over. But me, after the service was over, I used to go away very fast. I used to look for, it was like an escape route. I felt like the world was going to hurt me, so my heart is beating so fast, like someone is coming for me, but no one is really coming for me. People are just talking. But me, I would escape, go back home. So yeah, that's what happened then. When I was in campus, that's when everything broke. I'm sorry. So I was now at the loneliest point of my life, because, you know, campus, you have to take care of your own life. You are the one in charge of your life. So I'm looking at my life. Everything that I'm doing is being disapproved. My dad disapproved me from doing music, but that's what I loved most. So he wanted an educated person, because there was a time I was suspended from school. Then he told me, do you really want to be part of my family? Then if you want to be part of my family, a musician can't can't come to my boma or my homestead. Yeah, so I really couldn't figure out what I wanted to do with my life. You know, I'm in campus now, doing a course that I was compelled to do. So it really had a big impact, because now I'm looking at myself at an angle where my dad doesn't want me to do music.
Yeah.
And I'm also, I had a poor concentration in class, so reading was actually not my thing. So I'm looking at how do I want to process all this, plus the challenges I've gone through, then how do I want to really live music, but that was not the case. So life was hard. The first 3 months, that was the first semester, I got depressed for 2 weeks. I never got to class. My grades were even worse because getting depressed for 2 weeks, you miss classes, then yeah, that's the end of you. So I didn't realize until the next semester. So when the next semester opened, I think it was like, let me say, a norm, because I was getting depressed every 2 weeks when I enter school. So yeah, it was a very big challenge. So then I started realizing I have a problem. I can't socialize with people. This is a university, this is a financial institution, so I can't socialize with people. When I go to class, all I want to make is fun, make people laugh. Yeah. Then at least maybe I can get a friend, but that didn't happen. That's where the stigma starts, and people start calling me crazy, you know. So I went again, withdrew. So I felt like no one really cares, and I felt like there was no one, so I was like alone, fighting all my troubles, my challenges, my nightmares, all alone.
Okay.
Then bringing it to loneliness, back to loneliness. You are lonely, you are alone, then the weight of the world is all over you. Then it was a very big challenge for me. So I then went into gambling addiction. So that was another breaking point for me, because there was a time I lost. You know, now I'm living with bipolar disorder, anxiety and PTSD. So when I was on the manic side, you are very hopeful that something good is going to happen. So when I started gambling, I knew that when I place a bet, this is going to give me back some money. So then I had my last money, what I had from my pocket. So that's what I gambled with, and I lost it. So I felt like I lost my mind, because it was like, now you have lost. I went back to the hostel, and I was alone in the room, because I didn't have my roommates were not there. So I was alone in a room of 4 people, 4 beds, but I'm alone in my bed. So it was very depressing. Then you are losing, you have no one to talk to. You feel like you're losing your mind too. So I took my phone, banged it on the wall. Then I felt like, let me just end it, because I've lost this game. Then there's too much going on in my mind. I can't concentrate in class. People are calling me crazy. You know, that's that kind of stuff. So it was really hard for me to process, and I felt like the world doesn't need me, so I'll just take my own life. But then something happened. I listened to the voices in my head. So one voice was that search for the best way of ending it. But the other voice was like, why did you do music? Why did you write that song? you can't leave your songs like that. So yeah, I did it for my music. Then the voices in my head also told me, like, if you're not going to do it for yourself, don't do it for the world, do it for your music.
Okay,
So,
let's
yeah.
stop at that point. And I think that story is very weighty on the impact it can even have on your mental health.
Yes.
This child clearly grew up with a lot of social anxiety, and it
Yes.
translated throughout up until his campus life. Tell us that I think it is actually unpack his life from a psychologist's point of view.
What I like a lot about Jefferson is that he has been able now to come into terms with what is he going through? What has he been going through? And even if he has not completely healed, because he has said he sometimes gets nightmares. And therefore, there are still symptoms of PTSD that needs to be healed. Now, in terms of unpacking, what do I think that has happened to Jefferson from the time that he was a young boy? Number one, you see parents who are, and especially dad, who was very inadequate. I wanted to hear a little bit about mom, but it would seem the dominant parent for Jefferson is dad. And dad was a very inefficient parent in the sense of the words that he spoke to his child and even the things that he said to him. Because when he tells him, don't pray, then he tells him, don't be yourself and don't be a child. And this is what has followed him throughout his life, being different, because then he became withdrawn. And this is what he's saying, I became a child and an individual who has social withdrawal and social anxiety. He did not develop socialization skills, and he did not have confidence that he can be accepted by others within social circles. Certainly when dad rejected him, rejection has followed him throughout his own life, because certainly you are defensive. And others are going to see how defensive you are and that you're not authentic and spontaneous, because it's not a spontaneous individual. A spontaneous individual joins others. You will do the activities that the other children are doing, but not Jefferson, because he was not permitted. And therefore, a lot of things that needed to heal. There is the social anxiety, but there is also like generalized anxiety. What we psychologists will say, that is generalized anxiety. But the more you unpack through psychotherapy, the more you realize it's not actually generalized anxiety. It is very specific to certain experiences that the child was going through. But there is now the big one, the PTSD. Because we need now to see what are the different traumas. There is something we call the trauma egg. And in the trauma egg, we get our clients to tell us the different traumas that they went through at different developmental stages. Certainly starting with the earliest trauma, and then unpacking all the other traumas that one went through. But again, he says he's living with bipolar, and he has been going through suicidal ideations. That feeling of life is worthless, I am not important, I am inadequate, those are the voices of the dad. And bipolar originates from the traumas that one goes through. And what is trauma? Trauma is that you have broken from yourself. You have dissociated from yourself. So how does it look like? It looks like sometimes you are down, other times you're up. That is what he's calling. There are times he's very excited, where he feels he can turn around the world, but there are times that he's down there and wondering, who can pull me out of this helplessness? Now, what needs to happen is to try to bring together, because these are polarities. Polarities of, I can do it, I am hopeful, I have a lot of energy, and I don't have energy, and I'm down, and I'm finished, and I don't have any need of this life. We need now to bring the two polarities together so that there can be an integration of the opposite polarities that we see in the individual, so that one is not having multiple personalities, so to say, but you're having an integrated personality. That is a long walk in psychotherapy.
All right. Now, definitely a lot of your feedback also coming through, even as you resonate with today's conversation on facing childhood traumas. Remember, we are asking you, did you face any childhood trauma, and how has that impacted on your adulthood today, and how are you coping? Safia Abji says, children learn safety at home. If you do not create an environment of a safe connection and security mentally, physically, and emotionally, this trauma teaches the child that the world is unsafe and determines how he or she will view and relate to the world. That is true, Safia. Thank you for sharing. Ashwin Nazan says, can't complain. I lost both my parents at a tender age. However, I turned out well. It depends on how one handles the situation, one step at a time. To some, it seems hard, especially when the child is ignored. Thank you for sharing. Cindy says, I lost my father at a very tender age, and it really hit me hard. I was Papa's last born and the last daughter. It affected me psychologically as I was growing up. I never wanted to talk about his death till to date, because when it happened, I was there with Mom and my big sister. So you witnessed your father passing on. Pole sana, Cindy. Prince Natia says, as a child, I never had the freedom to choose what I want. It was all about the royal culture, which made me shy away from my peers as I felt too special with guards everywhere. My son will have a right to choose. Wow, Prince, thank you for sharing that. Rasta Pastor says, my school life was a hell. Never thought I'd pull through after my dad solemnly disowned me because of my terrible score sheet. It was hell. But through the efforts of Mom, I'm able to say today I'm in the right direction and doing the best out of me. But what I lacked was guidance growing up. Thank you all for being so candid with your experiences, and I hope that even as you watch this episode today, you now can see the relationship between what you faced as a child and how it has an impact on who you are today. But the news and the good news here is that you can actually heal from this trauma. So when we come back, we'll talk more about that. Stay with us.
Get the best value for your money by subscribing today for Classic Bouquet at only 899 shillings for 30 days to enjoy 64 channels. Classic Bouquet. Premium content on Star Times. Subscribe today.
Wonderful, your baby's quite active. After I discovered Molfix, I rediscovered my baby. She's jumping and running around. Well, we call that the Molfix Comfort.
Thanks to its elastic side bands, Molfix provides freedom of movement for your baby.
All babies deserve a high-quality diaper. You should also try Molfix.
Fresh fried ginger has ginger oil, which is good for a healthy living lifestyle. It combines wonderfully on salads, stir fries, when basted on roasted meat, or simply sprinkled on your favorite dish. Now available in 250 ml, 500 ml, and 1 liter.
ABSA congratulates Ferdinand Omanyala on breaking the 100 meters African record at the ABSA Kipkeino Classic.
Stand a chance to win 1 million Kenya shillings monthly grand prize by depositing into your personal or business account. 10 lucky winners will get to double their deposits of up to 100,000 Kenya shillings. The more you deposit, the higher your chances of winning. That's Africanacity. That's ABSA.
Hello, my name is Mutuma Matthew. I'm the Group Editorial Director at the Nation Media Group. And this is a special message to all our subscribers on the first anniversary of Nation.Africa. We want to thank you most sincerely for staying with us. We know you could have been anywhere in the world, but you chose to be with us. Thank you.
AMRC's objectives are aligned with the government's affordable housing pillar of the Big Four agenda. Visit any of the participating financial institutions today and start your home ownership journey. Kenya Mortgage Refinance Company, unlocking liquidity for affordable housing.
It is your world. My name is Gladys Gachanja. That conversation facing childhood traumas. Still with my panelists, we have Dr. Catherine Gashutha, we have Ching, we have Jefferson, and of course we have Januss. Now, Januss, you mentioned that growing up was a little bit different for you. Also the struggle to fit in, and also now fed into the rebellion. And now you're a young mom trying to figure it out in life. When you think about the connects back to your child and who you are today, what are the things that have been the greatest struggle?
Thanks, Gladys. So I think the biggest struggle has been a deep sense of insecurity, stemming out of that lack of validation while growing up, and then also getting pregnant while still very young, and coming into a world where there's a certain expectation that because now you're pregnant, number one, you've not only just brought shame to your family, but chances are this will be your life moving forward. There starts the trend of, many more children to come. You won't have an opportunity to achieve and succeed in life because, you're a single mother. And as a result, there isn't the possibility that someone else could love you with your child and want to make, you a girlfriend, a wife, and things like that. So what it meant for me is that I made quite a number of very poor decisions around my relationships. I, chose to be with people who showed even, the slightest interest in me. And many of those relationships were harmful. They were toxic. They were unhealthy relationships. But I stayed in them because for me, at the back of my head, I was always asking myself, what if, no one else thinks that I am the kind of person they would want to be with. So years and years of very unhealthy, toxic relationships, many of them short-lived. Then that building onto, you know, the insecurity that I had. I was the person who would bend over backwards, you know, to do things for these people because I wanted them to want me, to want to be with me. And it's only, you know, much later, maybe about 2 to 3 years ago, that the realization of what that impact has been on my life really, really hit hard. And, you know, and trying to take stock of those decisions and how those had impacted my well-being. In sometime in 2018, I went into 2019, actually, I went into depression. I was put on medication. And it's then that I realized that something is wrong, something is off. It just seemed like the way of life. But then when that happened and I had to go through counseling and therapy, is when I realized that this all stems back from my lack of validation, the consequent insecurity, having to, you know, deal with all these naysayers that might not amount to anything, you know, now that I'd gotten pregnant at an early age. But then accomplishing a lot, you know, raising a child on my own, of course, with a lot of help from my family, but still not being able to see how much I'd accomplished because I was stuck in that space where I felt that I still good enough. I still wasn't doing my best. And I think when I went through that period of depression is when I realized, hold up, something needs to change. Something needs to change because this quality of life has to improve. And you have a young girl, a young woman who's looking at you and learning and taking a leaf from the way you live your life, then it's about time that you really, really get your act together. And that's what led into my journey of transformation. It's still work in progress. There's still so many things I need to figure out, but I'm glad that I have this level of self-awareness now that I know what my triggers are. I know when it's very clear what kind of situation I need to avoid, but it has not been just because I sat back and said, this is my life and so be it. I've had to put in a lot of work. I've had to confront many of the people who I felt, not confront, but have candid conversations with people who I felt I let get away with so much, because that was part of my process for closure and dealing with my past. Many, and I keep saying many of them, most of them were receptive, but others weren't, because also I had to decide that I'm doing this for me. So if this other person does not acknowledge their part in it, I'm clear about where I sit. And that has really helped me to have a better frame of mind when I think about myself. It has significantly boosted my self-esteem. And here we are, moving on.
All right.
Going strong.
I really, really appreciate that story because it brings to the fore that there is healing from childhood trauma, but it takes self-awareness. Now, Catherine, talk about what Januss puts to the fore. You lacked validation when you were a child. You keep getting into relationships that are hurting you, but you keep getting from one to another to another. You talked about it being relieving the trauma. Talk about that.
Yeah. You can be able to see it because Januss is saying for her, it started when she was an adolescent and got a baby. But again, sometimes it can be starting a little bit before that, because you can realize you are insecure. And she said that because she felt her family was not as endowed as other families surrounding her, that had a sense of, I'm not as good, I'm not as adequate, I have a low self-esteem, and I have to keep on proving myself over and over again. And because your worth is not realistic to who you are, because you're measuring yourself against the unresolved issues within oneself, then there is a way you keep on repeating or making decisions that compromise where you should be in life or the quality of life you should be having. And you find those decisions now they make it more difficult for you to be able to pull yourself up and kind of position yourself in a life trajectory that respects who you are as a person. So, like Januss says that she wanted to please other people. When you become a pleaser and a paracater, then there is a way you can compromise yourself in terms of what you allow yourself to go through. Like you can have sex with people not because you really want to have sex, but because you want to make them happy, or because you don't want to annoy them, because you live your life pleasing other people, not pleasing yourself. But Januss is saying, I have come to a point where I'm telling myself, whatever I do has to come from me. It doesn't have to come from the world and the voices that I hear from the world. It has to come from an intrinsic angle, from me as a person, not from other people and experiences that I have come through. A point where she has been able to define herself and to know, me as Januss, these are my values and these are my needs, and this is how I would want to carry on my own life. That is a journey of healing where one is able to know who they are. We call it identity search. An identity search will lead an individual to identity formation, exactly knowing who you are. And she has said that she has gotten to a level she can say, I am aware of me. I am aware of me in terms of my own values, my own philosophy in life, my own goals in life, my own do's and don'ts, all those things, so that even if a person is saying, do this, you can be able to say, no, I am not going to do it because I don't feel persuaded from within myself that I have to do it. I think it's a journey where people need to define themselves, know themselves, make decisions that are more intrinsic, become their own drivers in their own lives rather than becoming passengers in their own lives.
So this begs the question, how do you know? Of course, the stories speak for themselves, and we've had the feedback this morning. How do you know that your childhood trauma still has an effect on you? What is a simple way to define that?
Right. You know that because you get feedback from other people. Like when we were listening to Jefferson, people said, you're crazy. This is feedback. And you might want to stop and ask, Gladys told me I am crazy. Let me ask Gladys, tell me much more about that. Because then when I listen to my feedback and I compare what other people are saying with what is coming from within myself, I'll be able to tell the truth about my own life. So feedback helps. And sometimes feedback is given in very incriminating ways and very judgmental ways. Nevertheless, when you come to the point of awareness or wanting to understand yourself, you will listen to that and ask yourself, what does that tell me about me? Now, you would want now to start discovering the reason as to why the world is saying you are different. And even for you, there are certain patterns that you start experiencing, that I make relationships or I get into relationships, and this is the way they fall out. And is it about those other people or is it about me? And even if it's about them, what is the portion that is about them and what is the portion that is about me? Because I can't do the changing for them, but I can do the changing and I can do the awareness for me, because it is me who would want to live a meaningful life. It is me who would want to live a quality life. I cannot go blaming other people for my life. I need to take charge and move on in my own life, making decisions for me that care for me, that are protecting me, and not protecting me in a point of defensiveness, but protecting me in a point of saying, I don't want you to damage me, I will take care of me. If this relationship is making me feel nothing or useless, then I do not want to be in this relationship. Or if I want to be in this relationship, I want to change the transactions within this relationship.
Oh, well put. Okay, so for Acheng, how have you done that with your own life? When and how have you been able to take charge?
I was very privileged to have worked for a space that was in the business of healing. And so I got very much acquainted to, you know, what father wounds are, what mother wounds are, and there was really a lot of equipping around how to deal with it. And at the core of that was the realization that, you know, as Daktari said, there are certain patterns that I can recognize. There are certain behaviors that and tendencies that I can pick up from how I live out my life. And just the realization that those patterns that are destructive, those behaviors that are destructive, actually stem from unhealthy emotions, a lot of fear and anxiety, fear of failure, fear of rejection, but then going to another level of recognizing that these emotions are actually informed by my thought patterns. And so there's a certain way that, you know, I realized that my experiences in my childhood fed certain thoughts into my head. Thoughts like, you're not enough, you'll never amount to anything, you'll never go beyond a certain point. And just realizing that, oh, these thoughts are actually untrue. I actually have core beliefs about myself. I have core beliefs about God. I have core beliefs about others that are untrue. And what I need to do is sort of go into a process and a time of renewing my mind to what is true about me, what is true about Acheng. I am enough. I can achieve all that I set my mind to. I can amount to, you know, anything that I set my mind to, believing that God has His best for me. Just going through that process of deliberately being conscious of what are my behaviors, what are my emotions, what are my everyday thoughts, which then help me to be better every day. I would say for me, just understanding that behaviors stem from a deeper place of core beliefs and thoughts that may be untrue really equipped me to win on a day-to-day basis. Yeah.
Okay, now, quick one. Januss mentioned that she has had to go and have candid talks with some of the people that had a direct impact on her life today. Have you had to do that walk down memory lane?
Yes.
Has it helped?
Yes, it has. You know, you're not able to medicate an ailment that you don't understand or that you can't name. It's very difficult. And so for me to be able to identify which thoughts were destructive or, you know, negative and feeding me to have unhealthy emotions and destructive behaviors, I had to go back to what were those experiences? What actually happened to me when I was a child? What was my relationship with my mother? What was my relationship with my siblings? What was my relationship with my father? And so yes, I had to sort of just go back into that space and acknowledge this happened to me. It's messy. It's not flowery. You know, it sort of stinks, but it happened. And for me to be able to come out of it, I have to acknowledge that it happened. And so, yeah, I agree with Daktari. You know, I tend to say that we don't take trips down memory lane to stay down memory lane.
Yes.
We take trips down memory lane so that then we can rise above what happened there. And so even if you do purpose to go back and, you know, really interrogate what happened to you and how it affected you, it's more to for the purpose of coming out of it. And so we don't set camp there. Yeah.
Very well said. For you, Jefferson, even with the diagnosis of bipolar, anxiety and depression, you're living a better quality of life today. Did you at any point beyond therapy have to confront your dad?
On my first day of therapy, actually, it was a really hard one, because telling my story, then the therapist tells you that you have to forgive your dad, but you know, in your mind, this is something you go through every day. And when you have dreams, sometimes you have nightmares. You have dreams about your dad. So in the morning when you wake up, you still remember these things, but I couldn't let them define me, because at that point I was even tired, because I wanted to move on with my life. So I just wanted to make peace with my past, move on with the present, because I started looking at the words like, you are worthless, there is nothing that you can do for me. But then I look at myself and tell myself I am worth it because of what I have achieved and what I have overcome. Emotionally, I am stronger, and yeah, I believe that I was not worthless, because looking at his words defining me as a child, then looking at myself to the point I've reached, I've saved 3 lives from suicide, of which that is an achievement. You know, saving a life from suicide, that's a very hard job. And I know it's a, you know, in a country where people just look at others dying, but for the love of life, I decided to save someone from suicide. 3 people from suicide, and it's a lot. Yeah, it's been a very long journey, and you know, then I tell myself that so I am not worthless if I can save a life, and if I had a second chance from suicide, then why don't you have another second chance? Let's leave it together. You are not worthless. You are not what the world calls you. You are who you are, and you will become what you want the world to know who you are.
Okay.
Yeah.
Very well said, very well said. And Januss, of course, you said something had to change. You went through therapy and now you're living a better life. What can you say was that, of course, the incident with depression, but what is this that was so profound that life needed to shift?
I think it was the realization that there's a greater purpose. There's a greater purpose for us. There's a greater love, and that's a heavenly love. And that should. And I decided that for me, that was going to be my source. That was going to be the source of why I'm here, why I need to show up for other people, but more reason why I need to love myself first, so that then I can give to others what I feel in my heart is a kind of love that everybody needs to deserve. And it comes also with forgiveness and grace and all those things put together. I think that was my realization, and trying to work and strive towards being okay with how, you know, our Heavenly Father has loved us, and then using that as a basis for anything else and any other engagement. I think that for me was a turning point. And I'm thankful that I had that opportunity to go through that kind of process of learning and understanding. And back to what Aching said around understanding what those wounds are and what causes them, and the realization of the beliefs that we have in our heart is because we feel we're not adequate. But if you found it on something, you base it on something spiritual or a greater purpose and a greater reason for us being here, then all these things kind of make sense. So for me, that was the pivot. That's where the change came from.
And when you pivoted, how has life changed? Who are you today?
I am so much happier. I am so much lighter. I have no need for, I sleep better on most days. I mean, of course, there's still stuff that goes on in life that, you know, might give you a sleepless night here and there. But I am a lot happier. In my heart, I feel lots of joy. I am able to make decisions and be categorical, regardless of how unpopular they are. This is what I'd like, and this is how I'm going to move forward with it. And I don't feel that wishy kind of vibe that I used to feel before. I'm like, this is what I want. I'm sorry it sucks, but it is where we are. I found myself also accomplishing a lot more, even in terms of my work, because then I don't have that baggage weighing me down. I don't have my mind, I don't have this mind fog that causes me to dwell on an issue for way too long. I think about it for a little while. I allow myself 2 to 3 days to process, and I move, and you know, you get stuff done. So I'm finding myself being a lot more productive. I'm finding myself being a lot more happy. I have more happier days than I did before. And my relationships have improved. The ones that needed to fall off have fallen off, but the ones that have stayed are amazing. And I am living each day with that as my drive.
Okay, all right. I'm glad that we have panelists that are giving real life stories so that you can hear it is possible to actually heal from these childhood traumas. Now, even as we bring this conversation to a close, let's first hear from you, even as you share your own experiences. Remember, the question is, have you undergone any childhood trauma? How has it impacted on you? Whether says, I experienced all of this, lost mom at below 10 years, left with a quarrelsome, drunkard father who always hated us. My self-esteem went down. Even when I grew up, I could not socialize with people, had developed uncontrolled anger, many things. Today, I'm a mom. I'm all learned by myself to love people. I have learned by myself to love people. Wow, this is quite encouraging. Makumbi says, I'm overwhelmed with the stress of post-traumatic events. Makumbi, thank you for sharing, and I hope you can find the help you need. Josh Wambogo says, abused, but I have not grown that now. Okay, I'm not very sure what that means, but perhaps you can give us more details even as this conversation continues online. And Catherine, as we bring this to a close, first of all, is it necessary for you to confront the past or even the aggressor if you have to? Do you have to?
Yes, you need to do that. And like you can remember, even with Januss, that was going to be very liberating because you need to separate your past with your present as you're moving forward. And as she said, she didn't expect them to behave in a particular way. So even as you're confronting your past, because you're confronting people who brought experiences in your life that were very negative, you don't have to expect them to behave in a particular way. If they behave in a positive way and they say they are sorry, then that is very good. But then, even if they don't say they are sorry, you will have done your part because you're saying, you did this to me and I didn't like it, and I would want us to have a renewed relationship moving forward. Because what happens when you go through a traumatizing experience with someone, like a dad who sexually molests a daughter, it is very difficult to forgive, but she is forgiving for herself. She is forgiving for her liberation. She is forgiving to restart and to refresh and to be an entity as God wanted her to be. So it is important because you're opening a new chapter. And you'd want to live life differently, and you'd want to make decisions differently. It is like a landmark that you'd want to put a landmark. This is how my life was, but this is how I would want my life to be, and this is how I would want to reconstruct my relationships. I would want my relationships to be where I have power, not where I am powerless. Where I am power, I have power, and I'm moving forward.
So in the case somebody has already passed on, the aggressor or whoever caused you the pain, letting go and forgiving at that point will be good enough.
It is.
Okay. All right. The other question is, would you ever be totally healed of childhood trauma, or will you always perhaps have triggers from the past?
We have cases where people heal completely, where they feel, I have come to a place where I have forgiven and I have been able to recapture what was taken away by my trauma. And I am more resilient and more empowered and much better than if I didn't go through my traumas. So people can get to a point where they are much better than they could have been if they didn't go through those experiences that they went through. But again, there are some people, they have handled some of the aspects of the trauma, but they have not handled some key aspects of the trauma, and therefore the patterns of unhealth still follow them. And maybe they are still taking psychological painkillers, like when you find you're taking alcohol or drugs to try and numb your feelings. That then tells you you have not completely healed. You're taking psychological painkillers to help you to be able to feel well, but you're not well. You need to go for therapy.
Okay, and a last one here. How do we do better so that we do not pass this on to our children? Because a lot of the trauma spoken of today is actually from our own parents' past.
I think when we need in our schools and even within community and even in our religious organizations to have seminars and programs where people get healed. But even individuals can look for their own healing, where they are journaling and they are talking to people who are safe to talk to, and they are going for therapy so that they can be able to handle those unfinished businesses of the past that were traumatizing or traumatized them when they were growing up. And one can get traumatized at any point in life. 50 years may be the time that you're getting traumatized. You have been raped by a stranger. This now becomes a trauma. So every person has to commit to deal with traumas in one's life that keep on minimizing you and keep on making you to make decisions that hurt you and injure you and make the quality of your life to be dismal.
All right. Thank you for that information, and definitely a lot of it has come out of this conversation on facing childhood traumas, and I hope even as you face your own that you can be liberated by first being self-aware and also seeking help from professionals who can help you debunk and also debrief to ensure that they do not have a negative impact on your adulthood. Well, Dr. Catherine Gachanja, counseling psychologist, Acheng Ogola, certified professional life coach, Jefferson Otieno, mental health artist, and Januss Njoroge, development communications expert. We thank you for being so candid and being part of this conversation, because you truly did bring out the stories so that others can relate with real life situations. Well, tomorrow, my colleague, that is Victor Kiprop, will be on the steering wheel as we mark the World Health Day. Actually, it's a World Heart Day. According to the World Health Organization, cardiovascular diseases remain the world's #1 killer, resulting in 18.6 million deaths a year. Now, in a world of COVID-19, how is Kenya doing? Find out tomorrow from 7 a.m.